You're at Lib Dem conference this week in Brighton. You've got a lot of big debates going on. One of them is about wealth taxes, and the talk of the creation of a £100 billion citizens fund to spread the UK's wealth more evenly. Where's that money going to come from?
Well, we've suggested that our starting point is that, wealth in this country is distributed very unevenly, and it would be reasonable and sensible to do things like, for example, taxing capital gains on the same basis as income, of equalising the tax relief on pensions with currently very different rates between high and low earners, and replacing the inheritance tax system, which is rather a broken system of taxation, with one based on lifetime gifts. And we estimate that if you do that sensibly, you raise a substantial sum, maybe 15 billion a year. And in addition, when, for example, the Royal Bank of Scotland is ready to sell, that the receipts of that shouldn't be simply squandered on current spending, but should go into the Sovereign Wealth Fund.
And what are you going to spend the Sovereign Wealth Fund on?
Well, it would be...
Are you going to squander it, just like you were just talking about?
Not at all. I mean, the whole purpose is that, there is a temptation with government revenue just to spend it immediately. The Sovereign Wealth Fund, they've got very good funds in Singapore and Norway, is that they're used for government. It's effectively a way of saving for the nation. As a country, we don't save enough, and it's a form of saving, and then it is allocated on a professional basis by people independent of politicians in long-term investment.
You talk about the Sovereign Wealth Fund. You mentioned Norway, of course. I mean, they actually own something, wasn't it? Something like 3% of the wealth of the world through their Sovereign Wealth Fund, purchased entirely from the funds of North Sea oil. Well, our money was from North Sea oil was spent
and it was
on.
all wasted, wasn't
well,
it?
you can say wasted. You can say spent. I mean, whichever perspective one. If one was a recipient, probably was quite pleased about it. But we saw a massive boost in terms of spending on public services without taxes going up. And that's where the money went. The Norwegians have got this fund in perpetuity. They're only allowed to spend a certain percentage of it every year, so it can't be, as you say, squandered. But that money was got from a money that hadn't already existed because of the North Sea oil money. Do you not think that a lot of people will be rather cross about extra taxes that's going on something for the future rather than being spent on public services now? When we talk about austerity all the time, do we not need to spend money on social care rather than worrying about things in the future?
Well, there are, and I think we have to be honest with people that, we're all going to have to make a contribution to that. I mean, one of our commitments that we've made is that we should have a penny in the pound on income tax in order to fund health and social care. It's about $6 billion a year. Take some of the pressure off it. It's not a long-term solution. We probably need what's called in the jargon a hypothecated tax, which protects the health service and social care from spending battles every year. But in the short run, I think we just have to be honest. We're all going to pay a bit more tax to make sure the health and social care system is properly funded.
Now, one of the troubles with it being a third party like the Liberal Democrats is trying to get, not be squeezed by the other big parties, Labour and the Tories. And we did see a breakthrough from the Liberal Democrats. Of course, you made it into government. You, of course, were the former business secretary, but then punished very much by the electorate for doing that, going into coalition, and now many points down. You've talked about the sort of the route through for the Liberal Democrats, where the future lies, and you seem to think the future lies in, for instance, a non-politician leader of the Liberal Democrats. You want to pave the way for the next leader after you, planning to step down in the next few years, to try and bring the Liberal Democrats forward. Why do you think that a non-politician, a non-MP, should lead a political party? Why do you think that politicians are seen to have failed so much, or indeed that the quality of the MPs in your party is so poor that it should be a non-MP?
No, we have some very good people, and if I fell under the bus tomorrow, I'm pretty sure that one of my colleagues is perfectly qualified to do it. What I'm wanting to do is not rule out the option of looking at people outside. I mean, there's some very talented people in professions where they're not allowed to disclose their political allegiances, but they may have good leadership skills and they may well be aligned with our values, and we should at least look at them.
And are you not worried about the idea? You suggested that you should open up some of the party rules in terms of allowing what you call liberal-minded people signing up to the Lib Dems for free and getting the right to vote for the leadership. I mean, we saw what happened in the Labour Party when you had a couple of quid to join the Labour Party and to have a chance to vote in that election. Are you not wary of what might happen to Liberal Democrats?
Yeah, I am wary, and we've seen in the Labour Party what's happened. I mean, actually, their system of opening up had both good and bad aspects. I mean, the bad aspects is the way the hard left, the extreme left, have taken over the party. The good aspects was that at the last election they did a lot better than they deserved to, because they were, lots of young people who got engaged who don't traditionally get involved in politics. So the expression I've used is that when you open the windows, you let in a few flies, and we've got to have some system for dealing with the flies. But it's not an argument for keeping the windows permanently shut.
OK, well, could argue that one of the reasons why a lot of young people voted Labour was for their own interest, because of the promises to end tuition fees, and even at one point mentioned during the election campaign by Jeremy Corbyn to end, write off all the debt that students had. I mean, hey, if I were a student, I'd vote for that. But of course, tuition fees and tuition fee debt was a major issue for the Liberal Democrats. One of the reasons a lot of people voted for you, one of the reasons a lot of people stopped voting for you after the coalition. And that's an issue of trust. There's a lot of issues on trust in the news today, issues of trust on immigration and trust also on the issue of Brexit. Now, we had Sadiq Khan, the London mayor, Labour London mayor, of course, saying yesterday that he endorsed the idea of a second referendum. And as we've been playing out this morning, only a few years ago, ahead of the referendum, he was saying, look, this is it. You don't get another chance. It's a one-off, end of once-in-a-lifetime vote. Nick Clegg, then Deputy Prime Minister, previously for you, but then a former leader, saying again exactly the same thing before the referendum, that this was a one-off vote, it wouldn't be another one. Do you not think there's a big risk with British voters that they're not going to trust anything politicians say if they do try to keep rerunning votes that they don't win?
Well, I think you're mixing up a lot of issues. I mean, starting with the students.
But it's all coming down to trust, though, isn't it? Doing as you say.
Let me just answer it. I mean, there was a pledge made 8 years ago. It shouldn't have been made, and we suffered for doing so. Of course, the other parties, Labour, had made pledges on the same subject and broken them too, and we shouldn't go down that road. And I think even Jeremy Corbyn's regretting the largesse that would be thrown at highly paid graduates. But let's move on from that. Specifically on the referendum, no, we do want to give the people a vote on the final deal. If they stick with their original judgment, well, they will win that argument. The Brexiteers will win that argument. But the fact is, the world has moved on enormously since we had that debate almost 2 years ago. What we now? Oh, yes, I think so. I mean, we've had over the summer the explanation from the government about what a no deal would actually mean. The government's own plan, the Chequers plan, has been shot to pieces by people in her own cabinet, let alone critics outside. I think the consequences are becoming much more apparent, and some people might say, well, OK, we'll put up with it. Others may wish to change their mind, and we want to give them the right to change their mind.
But we were told every single day for months on end ahead of the 2016 referendum that leaving would be terrible for the economy, massive, and people voted for it anyway.
Well, some of them did, knowing the consequences. I think it may well be that a lot of people would want to reaffirm that judgment. But all the evidence from the polling is that large numbers of people, now they begin to see what the consequences might be, are changing their minds.
Should we rerun the 2017 election as well, because people might have changed their minds?
Well, we do. I mean, we have general elections every few years. People change their mind.
People aren't asking for a second referendum in 5 years' time, are they? People are asking for a second referendum before we leave the EU. So should we rerun every election maybe once a month, just in case some people have changed their minds and we've got more information?
No, that would be silly. But
would it be any sillier? The principle's the same.
May did call a general election shortly after.
Yes, and how well did you do?
Well, she didn't. But
85% of voters voted for
Brexit.
Brexit-supporting party. Well, parties that
Oh, well,
promised
come
to
on. I
enact
mean,
Brexit.
Large numbers of Labour and Conservative people do not support that position.
But
and
they
that's why
voted for
the government
parties
is in
that did.
problem. Well,
I mean,
their
how much
leaders-
are we going to second-guess voters on this? We had a referendum. One of the reasons, of course, why there was a referendum was because a lot of the political parties didn't represent the views of the British public. We had a vote, and now we're told, well, there's more information. There's nothing in the latest version of Project Fear that's any different from the original version of Project Fear.
Well, the reason we originally had a referendum was because there was a division in the Conservative Party that Cameron wished to resolve in that way, and it wasn't a particularly sensible thing to do, and it's landed the country in a great mess. It was not there was no popular clamour for a referendum, but we did have it.
There was no popular. I'll tell you what, there was no popular clamour for. That was a referendum on AV, but we had one of those.
Well, indeed.
There were about four
and
people in the
we
Lib
lost
Dems
that.
who wanted that, and we still had one of those. There had been quite clear majority view that there should be a referendum on the EU for a number of years. That was why there was a referendum.
That really isn't the case. I mean, I was in the government at the time. We knew perfectly well that it was an absolutely minor issue. We were tackling with how to save the country after the collapse in the financial system. That was the priority, and how the very difficult issues around.
But that was my priority then as well.
Forward. But the Conservative Party has had an internal argument about Europe, which has gone on forever and made life hell for John Major and then for Cameron, and that's how they tried to resolve it. But the fact is, we've had it. The situation has now moved on. We've got a clear review about what no deal or Theresa May's deal might actually involve, and it seems perfectly reasonable and democratic to go back to the public and say, are you happy with this deal she's got, or would you rather stay where we are in the European
Well, hold on a
Union?
minute. Why would it stay in? Why not? No, are you happy with this deal or no deal? We've already answered the leave or remain question. So now you want to ask people, how should we leave? Why would you feel the need to put remain in? We've already answered that.
Well, because we now know that Remain is almost certain to be a good deal better than the deal which is potentially on offer, or the no deal arrangement. And I think there is an opportunity for people to vote again and think again about it.
And if people voted again to leave, would you then accept that, or would you want to have another vote in 2 years' time in case some people have changed their minds then?
No, of course. I mean, that is the
So
end
you'd
of it
accept
for
2 out of
foreseeable
3 then?
Yes, well, we've had 2, as you say, and this would be the 3rd. And, of course, that is the end of the controversy for the time being.
For the time being.
Let me say, for the foreseeable future.